Rena Shoshana Forrester, and I'm here to speak to you about turning PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, into PTGO, post-traumatic growth order, which is a term I made up. But we're going to start with just a little moment to arrive here. So I'm also a yoga teacher, and I'm also an Integrative Nutrition Health coach, and I need for myself to ground for a moment, so I invite you to join me. Let's take a few deep breaths in through the nose. You can do this with your eyes open or closed. And breathe out fully through the mouth. Squeeze the belly, get all the air out. And again, big breath in through the nose. And full breath out through the mouth. Let the breath return to normal. And take a moment to orient yourself to the space that you're in. So if your eyes are closed, you can open them and notice what you see first. And turn your head around in one direction, get your whole body involved, and look up and down, acknowledging the colors and the shapes that you see. And then we'll come back around through center and turn around the other way, acknowledging again colors and shapes, getting the whole body involved. And then coming back to center. And you can take your hands and maybe press them down into your legs just to ground yourself. I'm standing, so I'll just do it with my feet. Grounding us to where we are right now. And these are techniques that I use regularly, so you feel free to use them. I have some notes here, but we'll see if I need them. Okay, so who am I? I said my name is Rena Shoshana Forrester. I live in Kfar. Next month I'm opening the Rejuve Wellness Center, and basically I teach all the things that I'm certified to teach that have worked for me in order to get to the point that I'm at in my life. I have 2 bachelor's degrees in education, and I'm certified to teach yoga, trauma-informed, integrative nutrition health coach. I also teach kids yoga. I grew up in Chicago, and I made Aliyah about 7 years ago after living in Asia. I lived in South Korea, and I lived in Vietnam. And when I lived in Vietnam, I had a motorcycle accident that I didn't realize was near death, because in Vietnam, when you have a motorcycle accident, you just get back on the bike and keep going. So that's what I did, and I kept going for 7 years until I realized in a really roundabout way that I was carrying unprocessed trauma that had been running my life for 7 years. And that's the story I'm going to share with you. We'll also learn a little bit about, we'll do an intro to integrative nutrition because it relates, everything's connected to the gut. And feel free to raise your hand at any point if you have a question, or save it for the end. I tend to be more of an engaging type of teacher, so this is a little out of my comfort zone to just be speaking. But thank you for the opportunity, thank you for listening, and thank you, Zev. Okay, so I mentioned I was in Vietnam. I was working there at an international school, teaching English. Actually, I was teaching more than just English, but I was teaching to English language learners. And I experienced intense culture shock from the moment I landed there, and didn't have the tools to process that. And then I was working in a school that was a for-profit company that really didn't care about teachers or students. They cared about the money that they were making. And it was really hard for me to be a part of that system. But I stuck it out for as long as I could. And one of the things that was really hard is that we had to clock in and out every day at 8 in the morning and 5 p.m. And in the winter, Shabbat comes in before 5 p.m., as you all know. And for me, going to Chabad on Friday night was one of the things that really gave me a safe space to connect to myself and connect to community in Vietnam. So it was Friday, and I had this stress in my system of the culture shock, of the frustration of this school that needed me to clock out at 5 p.m., and I just really wanted to get out and get to Chabad. I waited till 5 p.m., I clocked out, I got on my motorcycle, and I drove as fast as I could, weaving through the streets of Hanoi, if any of you have been there. And I was like feeling really proud of myself. Okay, I know the directions, I know how to weave, I got this. I got to the last road before turning off into where Chabad is. The road is called Alpo. I've since been back there, and it's part of what allowed me to close out this trauma. They now have dividers in the road, and they have a traffic light that wasn't there when I lived there. And because I didn't grow up in the culture, I wasn't expecting a man to be waiting to turn left in the middle of the road. And so I drove right into him. He was a bread seller. His bread flew all over the place. I landed on the road, and thank God the traffic stopped, and a Vietnamese man wearing a suit who spoke English, which is really rare, came and helped pick the bike up off of me because I wasn't able to do that. He brought me over to the side of the road. I was bruised and ripped clothing and bloody, and he said, "Are you ready to go home?" And I said, "I guess." And I went to Chabad. And like I said, that I just kept going for 7 years like that. But in those 7 years, I had relatively a lot of success in my life. I studied yoga in that time. I studied Integrative Nutrition Health. I made Aliyah. I found love. But I felt like my life was kind of in this cycle that every time I felt like, okay, like I can grow, I can get better, something brought me back. And I couldn't figure out what it was. And in that time, a number of what I now view as symptoms came up that I had to work through. So the first was depression. And I now see this depression as a symptom of the post-trauma, but at the time I didn't know. And the depression started with a stomach ache right here that was very unique, unlike anything else. And I just like intuitively understood the mind-body connection, and that was the first manifestation of depression. And I was working with a psychologist at the time, and she said, which I now know is out of her scope to tell me, but she said, you need to consider taking antidepressants. And my grandma lived with depression for most of her life, and I saw that she took antidepressants and it didn't help her. And it's part of the reason that I committed to yoga, because when I found yoga and learned that there are tools for relieving depression and that it could actually work, I wanted to give that a fighting chance. So when she said you need to consider taking antidepressants, I was very resistant to it. But I wanted to show her and my parents that I was taking it seriously. I made an appointment with a psychiatrist, but you all know in Israel it takes a few weeks, months to actually see a professional if you're going through the kuppah. So in that time between scheduling the appointment and actually seeing the professional, I just doubled down on all the tools that I had, getting a full night of sleep, getting out into nature first thing in the morning, practicing yoga, practicing breath work, writing. I started making art. By the time I saw the psychiatrist, she gave me an hour of her time, which was really generous. And at the end, she said, I don't think you need to be taking medication. And this was in 2020, and I haven't had to consider taking medication since. So, win for me in depression. The next thing to surface was what I now have learned is orthorexia. And if you haven't heard of the term orthorexia is an eating disorder, but it's different from anorexia and bulimia, which are rooted in a desire to control. Orthorexia is rooted in perfectionism. And it's no stranger to people like me who really value health. And orthorexia essentially is crossing the line into valuing, like putting too much emphasis on health that it's no longer healthy. And what I mean by that is there was a time when I would, one memory that's really clear is that I was living with an ex-boyfriend of mine at the time. I came home and I was starving, so hungry, like in hysterics about how hungry I was, and there was no food ready for me to eat. And he looked at me, he said, baby, if you're so hungry, why didn't you stop at a gas station and eat something? And I said, at a gas station, there's no healthy food there. He said, would you think what you're doing now is healthy? And it hit me like a ton of bricks, but I wasn't ready to accept it. It was like, okay, yeah, but like I kept making excuses. And it was only later when I studied nutrition myself that I understood that that was a problem. And that sometimes eating anything is better than eating nothing. And after orthorexia, well, kind of in sync with this orthorexia thing was a lot of hormonal challenges. And I started taking hormonal birth control when I was 15 years old to help with irregular periods. A doctor in the US prescribed it. I took it for 10 years. And then I switched to a hormonal IUD that I had for 1 year while I was living in Vietnam. And I started to have a lot of cysts when I was living in Vietnam, and the doctors in Vietnam, who were mostly French, they said they would never have given a woman my age who had never given birth before that type of device. They advised me to take it out. I listened to their instructions, I took it out. I felt a huge weight had been lifted off my shoulders, but then as time went on, I understood that something wasn't right in my system. About half a year after I had the IUD taken out, I finished my job in Vietnam and I went to India. I thought I was going to be there for 2 weeks just to kind of reset my system, but I ended up staying longer, and that's where I studied yoga. And while I was studying yoga, I learned there from an Ayurvedic doctor who was one of my teachers how hormonal birth control has lots of side effects that aren't talked about, typically in Western medicine. And I asked her, what can I do to help my system? And she said, just give it time, your body will regulate itself. I got to Israel and my life was a mess the first year that I made Aliyah. That's a whole different story. After the first year, when my life started to settle down, I started to observe that there were cycles in terms of my habits and also in terms of my hair growth and my acne and my moods. And I went to see multiple doctors and they had blood work done. And there were some concerning things, but the general consensus was you look healthy, you practice yoga, we're not concerned. And I was concerned because it wasn't normal what I was experiencing. So I started doing my own research and I understood intuitively, and it was confirmed by my research, that there was a connection between my eating habits and my hormonal imbalances. And then it was in 2021, Rosh Hashanah, that I finally received a diagnosis for polycystic ovarian syndrome, which to me felt like a godsend because I felt validated by a doctor that I wasn't crazy. I actually was experiencing things that were off. And then I was able to take that diagnosis and start to do research about how can I heal this from the root. And that's what led me to study Integrative Nutrition and Health. And we're going to shift gears a little bit. Well, let's pause for a moment and see if anybody has any questions about anything I've said up until this point. Okay, so we're going to shift gears a little bit out of my personal story. I'm going to tell you a little bit about integrative nutrition, and then I'll come back and finish out my story. And I have here little handouts, so I'll pass these around. You want to take one and pass it around? This is an old handout that I made that was for a Nutrition for Women workshop. We're not going to get into the women part right now, but you have the information if you want it. And my contact information's on here. They're coming around. Okay, so intro to integrative nutrition. There's three philosophical components to integrative nutrition. The first is primary food. The second is secondary food, and the third is bio-individuality. So let's look at number one, primary food. It says the circle of life exercise. These 12 areas have been identified as the most, biggest, most influential things that impact our life, that nourish us not with food. And this is actually an exercise that you can do on your own. You can take a pen and think about how satisfied or dissatisfied you feel in these areas of your life. Think of the outer circle as satisfaction, and the point in the middle is dissatisfaction. And you can put a point either towards the outside if you're feeling, here. So you put a point towards the outside if you're feeling satisfied, and towards the inside if you're feeling dissatisfied. I have a pen in the box under the tree there. I have a notebook. Also, you can leave your contact information, and I have a pen there. Yeah, I wasn't sure if people would do it now or if you take it and do it later. I wasn't sure how many people would be here, how the timing would work. So, feel free to do that now. And what I find really helpful about the Circle of Life exercise is that there's usually not surprises that people notice. It's usually just it grounds what you already know about yourself. And it can help you to gain clarity about where you need to focus your attention and where you don't need to focus your attention right now. So I guess I'll pause for another minute and see if anybody wants to do the Circle of Life exercise. if anybody wants to share anything about it, any questions or any reflections. Okay, so we're here on the Circle of Life, and it's an exercise where you can assess how you're feeling in these areas of your life. The periphery of the circle represents feeling satisfied, and the dot in the middle represents feeling dissatisfied. And you can you can do it later if you want. You can take a pen and mark towards the outside if you're feeling satisfied and towards the inside if you're feeling dissatisfied, and then you can connect all the dots. You can also find the tool online if you Google Circle of Life. What? You don't have a pen. What?
Halfway.
Thank you. Okay, so you can do it on your own after, and I'm here if you want to sit and we can do it together. I'm just giving an overview right now. So let's move now to the second principle of integrative nutrition, which is secondary food. That's the food that we eat. And now on this sheet, we're going to look here at number 2, the integrative nutrition plate. And I'm sure some of you are familiar with like food pyramids or the My Plate. So you can just take a moment and observe what is on the integrative nutrition plate. And if anybody wants to share any reflections, you can raise your hand or just start talking. Okay, great. Then let's move into the third principle of integrative nutrition, which is bio-individuality. And bio-individuality is the idea that every person has their unique needs. Whatever has worked for me might not work for you. And you can read the 3 principles. I'll read them to you. Number 1, one person's food is another person's poison. Every food affects individuals differently. Number 2, there's no one-size-fits-all diet and nutrition, but improving gut health through basic food and lifestyle techniques is crucial to our overall health. Number 3, there are many factors that affect the risk of obesity and digestive disorders. Blood sugar regulation and microbiome diversity are key. So what this means when I'm working with clients is that I rarely give advice and I never give a diet plan. It's more about creating a space for a person to feel safe to share about what they're going through. Sometimes I provide some education, but then I really hold the client as an expert in themselves and the one leading their journey. Any questions about integrative nutrition? Cool. So you have these to take home with you. On the back is where we get into stuff about women, which I'm not going to go into that right now, but it's really fascinating. Okay, so by working with this system, by the way, I was able to heal my PCOS, and I've been back to a gynecologist who said, she looked at me and she's like, how'd you do this? What are you doing? And I've totally changed my lifestyle, my eating habits, reduced stress a lot in my life. But kind of the tipping point in my story with PTSD was that I was in a relationship, we got married, the marriage turned abusive and I got divorced. And after I got divorced, I started to have flashbacks from my time in Vietnam and from the motorcycle accident. And I didn't understand why they were bubbling up. And I went, about half a year after getting divorced, went to California. I visited my best friend there. And I woke up one morning and I couldn't move the whole upper part of my body, which has never happened to me before. I found, thank God, a really amazing chiropractor. And if anybody needs one in LA, I'm happy to recommend him. And he did a little assessment and he looked me in the eye and he said, you probably have a herniated disc right here in my neck. He said, don't worry, I have 7. I've never had an injection. And I've never had surgery. You have a profound healing journey to go on, and it starts with forgiving yourself. And I didn't understand what I needed to forgive myself for. But I accepted his invitation to do the work. I came back to Israel, and I started an intensive outpatient therapy program where I was working with a therapist one-on-one for 9 hours a week for 6 weeks. And in that time, I sat with a friend and just told her about my life and what I'm going through, and she said, sounds like you have PTSD. And I thought, what? I've studied trauma, I work with people who have trauma. What, me? And I went home and I opened up all my notes and I was like, yeah, I do. That's what I've been experiencing. And I sent a message to my therapist, and she didn't really make a big deal out of it. And then I went in to see her, and I said, and she like acted like everything was normal. And I said, why didn't you make a big deal out of this? Like, it's kind of a big deal. She said, I thought you knew. And I said, I didn't know. And once I knew, I was then able to apply all of the tools that I have on myself. And I took myself to the river. Under the bridge, I laid down and I guided myself through a visualization where I re-experienced a motorcycle accident. And what happened was, number one, I saw the scariest thing of my life, where I was in the middle of the road in Vietnam, blacked out for a moment, and like felt so horrible for my family and for my parents. And then a moment later, I saw a divine light that had shone down on me and stopped the traffic. And I understood in that moment that God had saved my life, and that if God saved my life, there must be a reason. And that I understood that I needed to teach all the tools that had allowed me to get to that point to other people. They work for me, they work for other people, they're scientifically proven, and I'm certified to teach them. I've since been to a psychiatrist who formally diagnosed the PTSD, which just seemed like a helpful thing to have on record. And once I understood that that's what I was working with, I watched a documentary on PTSD and learned that some people experience post-trauma that results in a lot of stress, but other people experience post-trauma that actually leads to profound growth. And in that moment, I just made a decision. I'm done with the stress. There's been enough stress and disorder in my life as a result of this trauma. I'm switching. I'm going to be one of the people that gets to grow from this. And then in that moment, I thought, okay, I need to change the wording. Because if I'm saying PTSD all the time, that's not helping anything. And I thought, okay, I need a term that's going to have 4 terms that's easy to say. And then I just thought, okay, post-traumatic, instead of stress, it's growth. Instead of disorder, it's order. Post-traumatic growth order, PTGO. And I also like that it's PTGO, like go, go, go. So that was it was this little moment. I was sitting in Tasha's living room when they decided this. But it really shifted everything for me. And the final thing that I want to say, it shifted everything because finally the cycle that I shared before, that I felt like I should be able to be going in this direction, but something's stopping me and having me in this cycle. Once I understood that I had PTGO and I was able to re-experience that trauma and close it out for myself, I was able to grow. And I've experienced endless miracles in my life since then. Things that I envisioned and wanted for myself are actually happening. And what's important that you understand, though, is that my healing and my recovery is for life. And for me, keeping up with all of the healthy habits that have allowed me to get to the place that I am now are the foundation. And having health is not a goal. Having health is the foundation that allows us to have other goals and keep going. And one other thing that's important to say, because I didn't talk too much about yoga and how it's connected here, but our mind is about 20% conscious and about 80% unconscious. So even the best psychologist and therapist is only able to access 20% of your mind if the work is only talk. The subconscious mind manifests itself in the body. And yoga is a scientific method for relieving ourselves of internal suffering, and it is based in the intrinsic understanding of the mind-body connection, and even further mind-body emotional spiritual connection. So I credit a lot my yoga practice with my ability to relieve the tension in my body and see how that's impacted my life. And that's also why I started with a little exercise here. And like I said, my healing is for life. I contemplated sharing this because it's really vulnerable, but I'm gonna go ahead and share that the next step in my healing journey is letting go of my relationship with marijuana to help with my healing. And I actually recently joined Marijuana Anonymous, and happy to connect anyone to that organization if you're interested. And it's really there were times in my journey when I really just wanted to end my life and didn't see how I could ever turn what I learned into something that could really help people, and it just overwhelmed me to the point of being paralyzed. So I'm extremely, extremely appreciative to you who are listening to me, to Zev who gave me the space to speak here, to myself for doing the work to be able to show up and share all of this with you. And I invite you to learn with me in my new wellness center, Rejuve, opening in Caesarea next month. Under the tree there, I have a box with my notebook. You can leave your contact information. I'll be offering one-on-one therapeutic yoga classes, group gentle yoga classes, one-on-one integrative nutrition health coaching, fermentation workshops, intro to nutrition for women workshops where we'll go in depth into the women stuff we didn't talk about today, solo, customizable, affordable day retreats, kids yoga classes, and who knows what else will be there. So again, thank you for listening, and does anybody have any questions? Yeah.
Oh, the bigger operations, they use big, no, it presses out the oxygen and then it keeps the pressure.
What's your name? Yagel? Okay, thanks Yagel for your really important question. Basically, if I understood correctly, let me know. Like, trauma is kind of a part of life, and shouldn't we kind of embrace it rather than pushing it off to the side? Yeah, I agree, and I believe like that's what I see as I did in my life, that I allowed myself to make space for it and to experience it. I see trauma as like I believe everything happens for a reason, and we all experience whatever it is in our life for a reason. It makes us part of who we are, and that if we make space for the trauma to be something that fuels us, then that's what it will do. And like I said, like my trauma has allowed me to feel immense passion for teaching what I'm able to teach, and I'm really grateful for that. Yeah. And I have my own traumatic birth story from when I was born. I can tell you another time. Any other questions? Cool, so I'll be around. Please come say hi, and I'm curious to hear your feedback from this talk. Thank you. I'll finish, I guess, how I finish my yoga classes. Thank you me, thank you you, and thank you everything that made this happen. Hallelujah, namaste, and let's keep learning a lot today.